Thank you very much, Ambassador, for sharing this very important conference and attending this very important, in a very, very troubling time. And we're going to discuss a few elements of the relationship between Israel and the United States, and maybe deal with the more actual issues that confronts us right now. So let me start with a more broader question. You know, the INSS, the Institute, has long advocated for the maintenance of the special relationship between Israel and United States, and we are worried of facing the internal trends inside Israel and in United States that in the long term they might be eroded, or some form of different types of connections or relationship may appear. And this was before the war, and the war presented us with the challenge, sort of a test. So my first question is, seeing what's happening in the past few months, what's facing that test? How did we do so far regarding that, and what's your estimation regarding the future of the special relationship between United States and Israel?
First, thank you. First, thank you very much for having me here today, Tamir. It's good to be back at INSS, and for many years I've admired the work that you do and found it valuable in terms of helping to think through the difficult issues confronting Israel, the region, and the United States in terms of our relations here. This is obviously a uniquely difficult period of time. I mean, sitting here today, just days after 6 hostages were brutally murdered, one of them an American, it's a difficult time to talk out of the moment, and the moment is one of deep outrage and hurt. But the relations between nations and within regions has to not just be stuck in a moment, but look beyond it to how do we get to a better place. I think the United States has demonstrated through President Biden's support for Israel, which has been unwavering because of his deep commitment to Israel as an idea, to Israel as an important partner of the United States, that we're still in a very strong place. Both in terms of the ability to maintain support for defending Israel, and I don't mean just with providing material support, I mean by being on the seas and in the air defending Israel, by being in world bodies defending Israel, sometimes sadly quite alone. So right now, I think we're in quite a strong place. I think for years we've seen trends that are worrisome, that have been aggravated by the images of this war and how that has manifested itself in terms of public demonstrations of views that frankly threaten the reality that we're in now. I think the kind of fundamental reality is, and now I can say this without it being politically controversial, the president is the last president of his generation. He's the last president who will remember a world without the state of Israel, for whom the Holocaust will not be kind of almost a contemporaneous memory, but will be history, for whom the events of the last 75 years will not be something that has been experienced. I think it's, not every president has had President Biden's deep sense of belief in Israel and in the Zionist idea. But one way or another, every president has come to support Israel as needed at the time the support was needed. I think there needs to be a real focus on a new generation. And I don't mean just of leaders, a new generation of voters, a new generation of that's going to be the future. And that generation is grown up in a different ecosystem than I grew up in or than the president grew up in. And it's an ecosystem driven by information that doesn't come through the traditional forms that I grew up counting on honest, accurate information. And it's an ecosystem in which the way Israel presents itself and is conscious of what the impact of that is as important as the actions taken on the battlefield to defend Israel. And it's not just a question of one side or the other. And you and I've had conversations about this. I think beyond Israel, there is a reemergence of an isolationist view in America, mostly on the right. There is a sense of kind of sympathy and support for the Palestinian cause, which is shared by many, but is seen in a binary way on the left. And in the middle, there's probably still 70% of America that's strongly pro-Israel. But in a highly partisan world, where those demographic trends are probably driving the two poles, there has to be a renewed focus on the importance of a bipartisan relationship, because there's a risk that if it becomes seen through a partisan lens, which it never has been and never should be, you could find it being more challenging 10 years or 15 years from now than it has been in the past or it is today.
So, to sum things up, are you optimistic regarding the fact that the center is shrinking? It's maybe a negative effect on the bilateral approach towards Israel?
No, I live as an optimist, so I'm going to answer as an optimist. I think that the fact that you still have the broad majority of America supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship based on shared values, based on it being in our common interests, not something that we do just for Israel, but where we gain strength by having a strong relationship with Israel, I think that's still the predominant view. I just would not treat as a small consideration that what people who are 20 and 30 and even 40 know and think is the same as what people 50, 60, and 70 think. And they've grown up in a world where Israel has been a small power but a superpower. And how Israel behaves in relationship to Palestinians and others, it has an impact on the depth of support. And while we unquestionably support Israel's right to defend itself, we've also said Israel has to defend itself in a way that that reflects well on our shared values. And we've had the kind of strong relationship where I'm proud, even in the 10 months that I'm here, our ability to talk candidly with each other has helped, I think, Israel stay in a path where there's a very strong argument to be made defending Israel. But one has to be focused on the importance of that in terms of maintaining the broad base of support in the United States.
Okay. Let's move to more actual urging problems and discuss the exit strategy and the hostage deal. The Israeli public, I think most of them know what's your plan A. That is to go through a hostage deal that will present us with a temporary ceasefire, and during that ceasefire we may resume the problems in the north through a temporary maybe agreement with Lebanon, and maybe extend that to a broader regional normalization that will support the day after in Gaza. Well, that seems very good plan and very, very well planned, but what if not? What if the hostage deal is stuck and there is no future for a hostage deal or a ceasefire? Is there a plan B? We have heard today that maybe United States is planning a bilateral agreements with Hamas to release its American citizens from captivity, or what's if not? What if it is disrupted? How is the plan B is going to work?
I can't skip over Plan A quite that quickly because we're devoting most of our energy, and when I say most of our energy, I mean from the President of the United States down through the entire foreign policy team, including myself. So we're treating Plan A not as something that it would be nice to have. It's something that we have to devote our 24/7 efforts to making happen. And notwithstanding what a difficult week this has been, I think it's important to realize that progress continues to be made. I mean, even on a day of tragic mourning, conversations at a very senior level between Israel and the mediators continued. And notwithstanding a very loud public debate on some of the key issues, progress even on those issues continues to be made. And we're not prepared to take the view that Plan A is not achievable.
And are you going to do practical issues to press Plan A of realizing it?
We've been doing that every day for months, and we are going to continue doing it. And the negotiations have gotten into the most difficult issues, some of which are not the subject of most of the public discussion. And the challenge is going to be to put together something where the mediators, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, with the support, hopefully, of Israel, can present something to Hamas where it is going to be clear that the pressure will be on Hamas to accept it. Now, does that mean that everyone has to be flexible or one side has to be flexible? In any negotiation, everyone has to be flexible. Very strong public comments sometimes coexist with residual flexibility, almost always. And we're going to press on that flexibility to find the key to a diplomatic solution, because the only way to get to the strategic objective that you correctly describe, our Plan A is to have a ceasefire and the release of hostages, to proceed to a negotiation with Hezbollah in Lebanon through Lebanon, to have a diplomatic resolution in the north, which we think both countries, or both Israel and Hezbollah, would consider their Plan A, and then to proceed and on the narrow path with the little time that we have left to get normalization accomplished. Now that's a lot, and it sounds like it's almost impossible, but we can't begin working on a Plan B, because the minute you say that there's going to be focus on a Plan B, Plan A becomes impossible. And I think Plan A still has a very feasible path towards being accomplished, not 100%.
So President Biden, when answered questions, said that Israel can do more, Prime Minister can do more. Is that the formal approach of the administration in Washington? That's the problem is with Israel not accepting to go beyond a certain point?
So, Tamir, first, if, as I'm sure you know, he was asked a question and he gave a one-word answer. So I would not overread a one-word answer. If you ask me, everybody has to do more. No negotiation is done until everybody does more. Does that mean that any party gives on the thing that is absolutely its bottom line? Negotiations work when you figure out where every party is straining and doesn't cross that line. I think that's possible here. I think, frankly, the public debate masks where the real difficult issues are, so you could take that as a pessimistic view. But I also think even on the issues where there have been public debate, you got to remember this is a phased agreement. Phase one has never called for the complete withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. It is...
And the Philadelphia corridor?
The Philadelphia corridor is in Gaza. There's no mention of the Philadelphia corridor in the document itself. The document refers to a general principle. That's how frameworks are designed. In fact, the Philadelphia corridor wasn't even an issue when the framework was drafted. But it is indicative of the need to have to comply with the terms for phase one, to withdraw from densely populated areas and reduce the presence. I think there's a pathway on phase one to have an agreement. If Egypt and Israel can agree on something, obviously the question remains, can Hamas agree to it? We'll never find out unless we present a full plan to Hamas. And that's what the goal of these next days and hopefully very short number of weeks is. I think any attempt to resolve in a final way what phase 2 will look like is going to be beyond what the current negotiation is about. It's designed to begin the negotiation on the details of phase 2 once you're well into phase 1. And the world actually could look different at that point than it does now, because there's work being done both on the military side and in terms of long-term security that could change the calculus of what is required in the future. So from our vantage point, it is absolutely essential to get into phase 1. That's how you save lives. And if after this weekend we don't understand that time is of the essence, that these lives will not be there to save if we wait too long, that should motivate everybody not to give up on phase 1.
Okay. Let's move to a more regional aspect. On the April 14, we saw a demonstration of the potential of regional integration of Israel in the Middle East. Why is that so crucial in your point of view? And is there still opportunity to resolve or to reach some form of achievement before elections or after the election? What's your assessment?
Look, at the broader strategic level, and I don't mean to oversimplify a very complicated set of issues, the question is Israel part of a general alliance with all of the moderate Arab world and Iran isolated with its proxies? Or is Iran going to continue to make inroads and expand its influence into the moderate Arab world? I think Israel is safer if we take the path of continuing to normalize relations and to isolate Iran. I think it's a defeat for Iran in a major way if that happens. I personally think it's a defeat for Hamas because Hamas has paid lip service to a two-state solution, but what it really wants is to have no Jewish state in this country. So I think the price for that will not be easy. It means getting into a negotiation over the future of the Palestinian self-governance at a very painful moment in the shadow of a war. I think Saudi Arabia has made clear, frankly, it made clear before October 7th, that it was not going to be prepared to go through the normalization process if it was on the same exact terms as the Abraham Accords. It needed more. I don't think it means something that is going to put Israel at risk. I mean, we've said all along, there cannot be an armed Palestinian state. We've made clear that Israel has to be part of any process of recognizing an entity that will provide self-governance to the Palestinian people. And I think there will have to be a willingness to get into a conversation where at the end of a process, there's an openness to there being a Palestinian, I have to say the word state, because I think if you don't say state, I don't think you probably get where you need to go. But not today, not tomorrow, understanding that there's an interim period of reforming the PA, understanding that in terms of after the war, governance in Gaza is going to require some interim process, but over the horizon, a plan that that Israel is willing to engage in. Now, I don't think that's actually a very high price to pay in exchange for the kind of strategic regional benefits and benefits
what
to Israel.
exactly is the high? It's not the high price to pay?
To engage in a serious conversation about how that could come into being.
But you
it's
understand
different from the creation itself.
But you understand the general narrative and sentiment in the Israeli public that providing a Palestinian state right now can be interpreted as a trophy for terror. That's the sentiment. You do.
But I'm going to push back on that because I actually described it in very different words than that. I don't think there's a trophy of a Palestinian state today. I think in some ways it's restating what many here at INSS have said for so many years, that there has to be a over the horizon long-term vision of how two people can live together and having there be a democratic Jewish state of Israel. I'm saying that Israel has to get into a serious conversation about that. And if you see it as a defeat for Iran, and if you see it as a defeat for Hamas, then I don't see it as a reward for October 7th. I see it as a punishment for October 7th.
Okay. Let's move on for more operational issues. We are grateful of the American support during this operation in all realms, from the strategic level to the operational level. But we have witnessed a kind of a temporary withdrawal or holding back of arms transfer to Israel due to confrontation with the policy of Israel government. Is there restrictions to the support of United States to Israel? Can you see a scenario when Israel will be, or United States will withhold its full supports in all levels towards Israel due to circumstances in the war or other policy issues of the Israeli government?
I think it's important to reset people's understanding of what actually happened, and to put it kind of back in reality as opposed to in a place that never was. What happened was there was one shipment that was put on hold, and a decision, because we have different views of the appropriate use of 2,000-pound bombs on one weapon system, how to manage that. That's actually what happened. Reading the discussion of it, hearing the discussion of it, you would think there was an embargo. There was never an embargo. The day that ship was held, aircraft delivered precision-guided munitions from the United States to Israel, even on the day that ship was held. I don't think most people know that because it was treated as something that it wasn't. I think the damage done by causing daylight between the United States and Israel feeds our common enemies. It gives Hamas reason to believe we're drifting apart. I don't see it as being in the U.S. or Israel interest to ever allow that daylight to grow beyond where it is. Friends can have different views as to what the appropriate use of a 2,000-pound bomb is, but you don't need to have your best friend be painted as if it's done something it hasn't done. So the reality is it was blown way out of proportion. I will say this about the pace of U.S. support for Israel since October 7th and from here forward. From October 7th for months, there was a drawdown of U.S. material that was in storage. There were decisions made to go around all normal processes to do it as quickly as possible. That was not sustainable forever. You draw down your inventories, then it takes time to replenish them. If you're going to divert material from one strategic ally to another strategic ally, those are hard decisions. They're not made without weighing and balancing what it means in terms of changed deterrence in other regions. And having spent most of my life working in and around the U.S. policy process, it's not sustainable to go around Congress without notifying transfers of weapons on a long-term basis. That's not how our system works. You know, some of the things were slowed down on this end. There was a fight internally here about whether or not to fund the F-15 purchase. That delayed some of the actions that Israel had to take. It was then notified to Congress. There were some members of Congress who had questions that had to get resolved. It all got resolved, and it's going forward. Now, that was one of the issues that was being used as an example of somehow our commitment had changed. That's the normal relationship. These issues cannot all be resolved in 24 hours. I know there's a higher degree of sensitivity on the replacement of munitions. But even on the replacement of munitions, I think there's now a shared understanding that they can be replaced at a certain pace, but not at the rate from October, November, and December.
So you don't see restrictions in the horizon over the support of Israel?
I don't see that we've taken steps that have any general impact that way, but you know, it's been very public there have been debates in the United States about whether there should be more restrictions. The decision made, by the Secretary of State was not to impose restrictions, that we did a very thorough review, and he reached the conclusion that there shouldn't be. That doesn't mean that there won't be more questions asked. And going back to the first part of our conversation, looking down the road, Israel does have to understand that those questions get asked, and they will get asked in the future as well. So it's important that there be a clear communication, a clear understanding, and in some cases taking into consideration how things are used. I have to say there's an issue that I've had a personal bit of frustration about. We were very clear that we were worried about the Rafah campaign. We saw 2 million people in a place where they had nowhere to go easily, where any kind of military campaign along the lines of Gaza City, Khan Yunis, or the Central Camp would have had devastating consequences. There was a process over months to prepare and then move people, have a place for people to go. It hasn't been perfect. It has still issues that are difficult to manage, but it provided a way for most people to get out of harm's way. And then there were conversations between the U.S. military and the Israeli military, between U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, where I don't think it's an overstatement to say the IDF rethought its battle plan and went about the fight in Rafah in a very different way. To me, rather than focus on the fact that it took some time to work through that, that's demonstration of the strength of the relationship, where our best thinking is shared and it's taken advantage of. It has an effect on execution. And when I hear it described as kind of we were wrong, I think we were very right. And I think it had effect on how it was done. And I think Israel is in a stronger position with the United States and the world because it did it in a way that we encouraged, while we didn't and will never take responsibility for making the decision of what Israel does when it does it. We can only offer our advice. Israel makes its own decisions in its own defense.
Okay, we're running out of time, but quick before we terminate this interview, I'm not going to ask you about the election, okay? And what's
because I can't answer.
But I'm going to ask you about personal relationship between leaders and how does that affect the diplomatic relationship between states and facing the options that were well known. How is that fundamental in diplomacy, that kind of special intimate or special personal relationship?
It is always the case that when leaders know each other and understand each other and trust each other, it makes doing easy things and hard things more possible. Those relationships of trust, as in all relationships of trust, have to be nurtured. And as in almost every other kind of political or human interaction, things that undermine trust create friction. I think that there has to be an ongoing, close, tight relationship both between the people of the United States of Israel, the governments of the United States of Israel, and the leaders of the United States and Israel. I think I probably have a different kind of representative role than most U.S. ambassadors do. We have different relationships here in terms of the closeness of them, the way we talk to each other, how much we share with each other. And that's true at the top as well. And that has to be nurtured, but it also has to be self-consciously protected. And relationships of trust require constant nurturing. There is a necessity for people to be able, at the highest levels, to be candid with each other. And that doesn't mean that you have a breach in the relationship. The closer you are, the more candid you have to be with each other. And if it gets to the point where you can't share those kinds of things candidly, hopefully mostly in private, the relationships don't stay as strong. And with your closest friends, within your family, there are always issues on which you'll have different views, maybe even disagree. It doesn't mean that you're not close, and it doesn't mean you can't be counted on. I think the idea of suggesting that in a close relationship it means not asking hard questions is kind of upside down. If your closest friends don't ask the hard questions, then they're not really your closest friends.
Thank you for that. I think it's a lesson for life, not just for diplomacy.
I tried to be general.
So, Ambassador, thank you very much for honoring us. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Tamir.